Hey, Lunamoth here. Okay, so in my last video, I talked about Russia, Ground Zero, the Manhattan Project, a lot about nuclear bombing, um, Ebola, how it's kind of tying into today, and it was like a bunch of puzzle pieces, but I didn't really have the larger picture. So here is another piece of the larger picture. So the last couple of videos I've had, they all kind of seem to be pointing back or drawing back to the Cold War. And I honestly, I didn't know a ton about the Cold War. I knew a lot about the events in the Cold War, but it covers such a large time span that I'm going to go over the Cold War really quick. Most scholars would agree that it's from 1947 to 1991-ish, in between that. Basically, I would say that it was like, okay, forgive me for simplifying something that's extremely complicated, but I would say that the Cold War is like the giants of the world standing around, threatening each other with their hands hovering over giant nuke buttons. Like, think of like an easy button from, I think it's Best Buy or one of the tech stores, but the easy button that you press, it's boop, easy. So think of that, but like a nuke button, where if you pressed it, your enemy and yourself would die. A culmination of world tensions that led to lots of military movement and crisis, but not necessarily a ton of action. So if you think of a war, you think of basically people dying, trenches, blood, guts, all of that kind of thing. This was called a Cold War because it wasn't a typical war. There wasn't necessarily, yes, there were deaths involved, but it wasn't the way that usual. It wasn't the way that other wars in history have played out. So, a few notable events were the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Wall, which originally started as a blockade, and then they later completed construction on to make it a wall. The end of the Cold War led to the eventual, dissolution and collapse of the USSR in 1991. And that split up into what we now know as Russia and the other countries surrounding it. So there were two major players in the Cold War, although this affected the whole world. Like, the whole world was involved. The U.S. and Russia, or the former Soviet Union, were the two major players. And the Cold War happened pretty much on the heels of World War II. So there was just, the world was in a confused, collapsed, broken state. No one trusted each other. Any alliances that countries thought that they had were questioned. And the whole world was in a state of unrest. So the major thing that I got from this, first of all, the Berlin Wall went up, cutting off food, materials, and supplies from West Berlin. And this kind of reminded me of the video that I made about provisions being cut off and how, food and water are going to be hard to come by. And then also was the possibility during this time of not an electromagnetic pulse, but a nuclear electromagnetic pulse. It's an N.E.M.P. So, NIMP. Nuclear EMP is caused when a warhead is detonated at a very high altitude over a certain area of land, or water, whatever. And an EMP can also result from a blast from a meteor exploding at a high altitude in the atmosphere. Nuclear EMP can also produce what is called a atmospheric tsunami. So for people who are having visions of tsunamis, or even people, I know there's a prophecy about Puerto Rico and meteor and tsunami and that kind of thing. And I'm wondering if it could be a different kind of tsunami than the one that you think. So let me read a little bit about this and help to put some things together. A nuclear weapon produces several different effects. The best known are the intense heat and hyperpressures associated with the fireball and the accompanying blast. But a nuclear explosion also generates massive outputs of other kinds of energy. These include the creation of intense streams of X-rays and gamma rays. If those are unleashed outside the Earth's atmosphere, some of them will interact with the air molecules of the upper atmosphere. The result is an enormous pulsed current of high-energy electrons that will interact, in turn, with the Earth's magnetic field. In an instant, an invisible radio frequency wave is produced, a wave of almost unimaginably immense intensity, approximately 1,000,000 times as strong as the most powerful radio signals on the Earth. The energy of this pulse would reach everything in line of sight of the detonation, and it would do so at the speed of light. The higher the altitude of the weapon's detonation, the larger the affected area would be. At a height of 300 miles, for example, the entire continental United States would be exposed, along with parts of Canada and Mexico. As the fireball expands in space, it would also generate electrical currents on Earth, ultra-high-speed electromagnetic shock waves that would endanger much of our technological infrastructure. Such high-speed currents would disable temporarily or permanently. Sorry, I cannot read tonight. So anyway, that describes a nuclear EMP tsunami, or an electromagnetic tsunami. Okay, because it causes electromagnetic waves that happen and take things out. So just consider that as well. Of course, with all the other disasters and things that we have to consider, there's also there's also the chance of an electromagnetic tsunami. Yay! Oh my gosh, isn't this fabulous? Okay, enough sarcasm. But so I really think that this could help clarify a lot of visions that people are getting. I hope that helps. I was listening to something a few days ago, and this woman's video was interrupted by a clip of Representative Trent Franks, who was talking about, once again, during the Cold War, the Soviets had a large warhead that they were waiting to detonate in order to cause an EMP. This was just kind of like a security measure to make sure things went well during the Cold War. Okay, so this warhead was 25 megatons. Okay. This caught my ear because there is a woman on YouTube who has prophesied or talked about a meteor coming and it being 20 megatons, and then a blackout occurring after the sighting of the meteor. Okay, so if there's a warhead that's 25 megatons and there is a meteor that's 20 megatons, don't you think that the meteor would be extremely capable of causing a large, large blackout to the effect of something like a nuclear EMP that would be caused by a 25 megaton warhead. It wouldn't have the same effect as far as radiation and that kind of thing. But as far as the energy that is amplified by and put out by some kind of blast like that, I'm just saying the measurements and calculations of 20 megatons and 25 megatons are pretty darn close. Okay, so basically EMP weapons can destroy even the best protected military and civilian electronic systems. There's no telling really what it will do because no one has used it just to, I mean, there's been a few tests, but nothing on a large scale that have really, really shown what an EMP would do to a community that relied on a grid like the US does. The main thing that caught my eye, unfortunately, when I was reading about nuclear EMPs is the concept of mutual assured destruction. Okay? So, mutually assured destruction is a doctrine of military strategy and national security policy in which a full-scale use of high-yield weapons of mass destruction by two or more opposing sides will cause the complete annihilation of both the attacker and the defender. It is based on the theory of deterrence, where the threat of using strong weapons against the enemy prevents the enemy's use of those same weapons. Okay? It assumes that each side has enough nuclear weaponry to destroy the other side, and that either side, if attacked for any reason by the other, would retaliate without fail with equal or greater force. The expected result is an immediate, irreversible escalation of hostilities, resulting in both combatants' mutual, total, and assured destruction. Okay? I'll read a little bit more. The doctrine further assumes that neither side will dare to launch a first strike because the other side will launch on warning. So basically there's first strike, there's fail deadly, and then there's second strike. It's basically talking about cause and effect and retaliation within this doctrine, as in like one side does something and the other side is sure to retaliate, if not on a larger scale. Okay, the payoff of the M.A.D doctrine is expected to be a tense but stable global peace. Okay, so this is basically like two men standing in a desert with a gun to each other's heads. Each one has the exact same gun, the exact same amount of bullets, and the exact same like rate of being able to pull the trigger. And they're standing there like, well, if you shoot, I shoot. If I shoot, you shoot. So we're just going to stand here with these guns to each other's head. And yeah, it's peaceful. No one is dying. But is it living? It's like a constant state of fear. Okay, so what caught my eye and also immediately made me sick about this is that I just made a video probably about a week ago called The Beginning of All Things M.A.D. And then I was trying to put the pieces together of this last video, and it was mutually assured destruction is M.A.D. M.A.D. is mutually assured destruction. The beginning of all things M.A.D. And I'm not sure that this completely has to do with some kind of nuclear attack, but it has to do definitely with the concept of, um, let me say, the result is an immediate, irreversible escalation of hostilities, resulting in both combatants' mutual, total, and assured destruction. The payoff is expected to be a tense but stable global peace. Um, so this is kind of like the New World Order, one world government gathering kind of thing. And the pieces are kind of starting to fall into place on what I was being told. Oh, I had one more thing. I think I keep getting pulled back in history because whether or not you believe in karma or debts or something like that, there is the basically irrefutable fact that history repeats itself. Okay, so let's suppose that this is the end times, like most people are talking about. Okay, so how does something end? How does something keep from repeating itself? How does it get changed? It means that old things, old wounds, must come up and be cleansed and brought into the light. It can only be cleansed by taking those events by taking like an old event's circumstances and changing the outcome of them. So this can only end by history repeating itself, and instead of making the same decisions and choices that we made the last time, we have to change the outcome. Okay, so this reminds me of post-traumatic stress disorder in a way, because I would like to say that Earth and history is suffering from a form of PTSD, where traumatic events, horrific things, are lodged in the mind or consciousness. And in order to treat something like PTSD, there is a treatment called EMDR. It's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a complicated process, but basically it goes into, it enables the person to go into the dark corner of the mind, or the place where this traumatic event was stored and packaged away from everything else so that the person could function, enables them to go into that memory, look at it, detached from it, process it, and maybe even, in their mind, change the outcome of it so that it no longer bears the weight or the burden that was there before. And I think that these kinds of things are going to be happening where it's like history repeats itself. Old things are going to come back, but we have to reprocess them. We have to rewrite the story in order for the end times to occur, if that makes sense. Like, things have to be cleansed and closed. These are old debts, old triggers that have to be released. Does that make sense? I hope so.